Seems like Bretton Woods has got their hands in the cookie jar again. Ladies and gentlemen, were you aware that Ukraine was heavily in debt to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank? What up, skis? My name's Ice. So, did you miss me? I bet you didn't expect me to be back so soon. Where do we begin? Forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, if I'm going to be pausing throughout the show. I put this together last minute. Been doing some research. Started to get a really good overall picture on the kind of the backstory behind the reasons that this war broke out, basically. A lot of people I hear talk about the war in 2014 when Russia seized the Crimea. But I believe, now that I've looked really into it, that the roots really go back to 1991. At during the fall of the Soviet Union and the creation of an independent Ukrainian state. So yeah. Let's see how we're gonna do this. Okay. Okay, so put some figures here. Ukraine is in debt, is a total debt. Let's slow it down. Where is it? Oh, here it is. Okay. There we go. Now, please like, subscribe, share. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host, Ice. Glad you're here. I hope I have some young viewers in the audience tonight, or whenever you're listening to this, by the way. It's Sunday, 7 o'clock at night. It's been taking me a really long time to upload on YouTube. Apparently maybe they're filtering it. Alphabet Inc. That is, with certain shareholders, but we'll get into that later. Okay. $94 billion total in debt. Now you might not think that's a lot, but it is. It's a lot. They take every dollar seriously. $1 million, $200 million, $1 billion, $94 billion in debt. Now, it's nothing, I guess, compared to our 30 trillion. But imagine, look at the world's richest people. I think Elon Musk is worth 250 billion. I think last time I checked. I could be wrong about that. So I mean, do you think he doesn't take that seriously? Now I don't know if that's his net worth or whatever, or how much money he personally has and liquid. I'm not really sure. But so $94 billion is a lot. Matter of fact, every country in the world is in debt. So, who makes money on that? Who loans out money? Right? Ask yourself, who loans the money out? So we got the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. They are located in Washington, D.C. The World Bank has lended out a total of $60 billion worldwide. Seems like they're focusing more on reconstruction in Africa and maybe some other parts of the world. The IMF, it seems like they've been concentrated in Ukraine. Matter of fact, let's see. The country is one of the IMF's 4 largest borrowers. Let's see. Here's a little history, which I read completely. This gives you a whole backstory on a lot of the situation going on over there. Got private bank here. I'm doing a little research on some players. These guys here, these guys here. European Union Ukraine Association Agreement, that fell through. Okay. I might have to kind of read this to you, if you don't mind. We'll read this, we'll read that. Were you aware that the Ukraine owes $2 billion to the I guess in interest to the IMF a year, or pending on their how they work out the agreements. It's not like what we thought. You know, I don't know why I said a year. It's like however they construct their loan agreements, I guess you could say. And it seems like Ukraine has been having trouble paying. Ask yourself this. Okay, so when they say like pick a side, right? What do you mean side of what? Are you talking about the government of Ukraine? Pick their side? Are you talking about who owns all the assets in Ukraine? Think about it. Do the average citizen own anything in Ukraine? You know, the soldiers, the people getting displaced, the police, you know, just your average person, worker, you know, just like in the U.S. Are they like major owners? You know, do they hold the deeds of a lot of like land, real estate, you know, infrastructure, corporations, this sort of thing, you know, financial institution. So am I picking a side with the groups that own stuff in Ukraine? The same with Russia. I mean, am I picking a side of Putin, the president, who I don't even know? Am I picking a side with the people of Russia? Am I picking a side of all the private and national various institutions based throughout Russia? So you have to ask yourself that. I mean, when you say sides, what do you mean really? I mean, who really owns? Look at it this way. We don't understand Ukraine because we don't live there. But we can understand the U.S. because we live here. Okay, good. So now I have your mind in the right place. The 99%, what do we own? I mean, we're the workers, we're laborers. I mean, in the U.S. it's different. I mean, we own a lot of stuff, but who really owns stuff, right? Banks, right? Financial institutions, shareholders, corporations. They're the ones that own the assets. Um, when we look at our government, right? We, I mean, this is not spouting conspiracy, misinformation. This is everybody can generally agree that it's it's generally understood that a lot of people don't necessarily think that the government is really elected by the people. It's more like installed puppet. Like there's something behind the scenes that owns and controls. Right? I mean, we understand that here in America. Okay, get it? But we're stable. I mean, this is a stable country. So imagine the Ukraine, right? I mean, do you think it's stable like our country is? Right? I mean, they were just created 20 what is it 30 30 years ago? This is 91, 2001. Yeah, 31 years, something like that. And they've had a lot of corruption, a lot of they had a war, right? So okay, so what happened as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed, right? You had people. Well, what was it? It was an opportunity for lenders, right? Because Ukraine had to create their own currency, basically, right? So they needed stability in their currency, which they weren't getting, and without a how do I put this? If they couldn't if that currency did have if they couldn't lend it out to spur growth or GDP, then they had to get people from outside if their currency wasn't working enough because maybe it was inflated or whatever, because they didn't have the assets in place like the World Bank does or other major institutional banks that have the assets. So they came in, so they'd ask, for loans. Same with Greece. Greece is heavily in debt to the IMF. Now here's where it gets tricky because that's how they get you. If they can't, that's how modern warfare is conducted nowadays. That was in the 90s. That was in the 90s. So let's see. This is the history. IMF granted Ukraine 16 billion. How much do they owe total to the IMF? Like I said, we're trying to track money here. Oh, okay. I was also going to tell you too. So there's a lot of talk about NATO, right? That the Ukraine wants to get involved with NATO or join NATO, and that's a big reason, of why Russia wouldn't want NATO on its doorstep, right? A connected border. But it also, the thing you have to consider, it's that also the European Union, right? The European Union is moving in on the Ukraine as well. It's called so like financial institutions out of the European Union, they're moving in, right? So basically, to give you everything in a nutshell, Western banks are moving in and buying up all the assets in Ukraine and lending money, and if they can't, if they're having trouble paying it back, then they start like owning some of it, I guess. Let's see. Interesting thing here is what I couldn't figure it out. Why did the IMF? Why was the IMF obsessed with the Ukraine's natural gas price? Also, okay, so the IMF is directly involved, or indirectly, I guess, and this is circumstantial. There's no evidence, of course, unless we keep digging. But there was some governments were overthrown, right? And then governments were replaced with governments pro European Union or pro economic deals, like and these are the players, these are corrupted players involved. That's called elite capture. So you elite capture all the businessmen in Ukraine, and then you create deals. Now, the only people who get saddled with the debt, though, right? The people. But the only people making money are the businessmen. Like, they're making like loan, like, okay, you elite capture the European business, like business moguls, right? Because you elite capture them. You say, okay, we're gonna make a deal. You're gonna make money. We're gonna make money. We're gonna loan you a whole bunch of money, and the people will pay the debt. You see how that works? Oh, and they'll go to war. They'll go to war as well. So, as long as you understand that, this was a deal. European Union. You see that? European Union, Ukraine Association Agreement. This got shot down by this government here. Okay. Mykola Azarov. Okay, he apparently didn't want to be a part of the deal. I'm pretty sure, we're paraphrasing, we're still looking into this, right? So conveniently, this was prior to 2014. Conveniently, there was some kind of civil unrest, which is known as the Euromaidan. Okay, these are like the rebels, the Euromaidan. The Maidan Uprising was a wave of demonstrations and civil unrest in Ukraine, which began on the night of 21st November 2013. Okay, what preceded this uprising installed a new government, which was these guys. The Yatsenyuk government. Okay, they assumed control in 2014, which probably pro-West. Okay? And then they could start making deals once you've elite captured the top echelon of Ukraine by the West. And I don't mean West like you and me or American government per se, right? I don't mean the politicians. I mean Western financial institutions, right, that have a vested interest in making business deals in the Ukraine. Because Ukraine, believe it or not, is the third largest economy in Europe. Did you know that? Okay, so now we're starting to get a picture on how it works. Okay, so who owns the World Bank? Well, the United States has the most shares. The World Bank doesn't like lend per se, but it has a branch called the IBRD. The IBRD is this, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Let's see, Ukraine's top line share of IMF reserve allocation, debt pressures building. Oh, by the way, the Ukraine has still been able to make all their financial obligations throughout all this. They've been issuing bonds or war bonds, but we're going to get into that. We're going to get into the bonds next next episode. Ukraine issues war bonds, raising $270 million. You might have heard of people who make money off bonds. Maybe you've heard of a guy named Rothschild, and after Waterloo. You might have heard of that. Private Group's largest commercial lender in Ukraine, the private bank. They had to be nationalized because guess who was moving in on the private bank? Guess who was moving in on the private bank? Western interest. Okay? Western interests. Who owns the IMF? I had it. I might have lost it. Innocence Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. I think it's the U.S. Let's see. Okay. So, okay, yeah. So Ukraine, the IMF, which is interesting. The IMF was loaning billions of dollars, right? But was requiring Ukraine to reform its natural gas price subsidies in return for an aid package of about $15 billion. They were obsessed with natural gas. They wanted to put tariffs on natural gas in the Ukraine. So we're still trying to work out the details about that. Yeah, I thought this was interesting at the end. Ukraine immediately received about $2 billion, while the remaining amount is planned to be dispersed in phases over four reviews during an 18-month period in order to qualify for the loan deal. This is interesting right here. Ukraine's parliament had voted to lift a ban on the sale of farmland and approved a new banking law which was designed to prevent Komosky and this guy from regaining control of a private bank. So these guys basically took control of the private bank. But they put a ban on the sale of farmland. So that's what I'm talking about. Like when you say like pick sides, well, who? With who though? Who owns the land? If you got a country that's poor and heavily in debt, what do they start doing to get some money? Well, they start selling off their assets like land, whatever else they can get, real estate assets. So now ask yourself this. After this is all over. Oh, and by the way, I mean, as this is all going on, right? All this money that's being exchanged back and forth, every day that ticks by, more citizens and soldiers in Ukraine on both sides, Russia and Ukraine, are dying. Okay? Every day. Tick, tick, tick. And what's going on all around it is all this money. Because this is nothing new. This happens during wartime. What opportunities we're gonna get? That's gonna be in next week. But as far as investing, right? Investors. I'm talking about you. You ain't got no money to invest. You're lucky to own a few penny stocks and some fucking $100 in Bitcoin that you keep spending selling off and losing money, and then rebuying. You're buying high and selling low, kid. I'm talking about you. I'm talking about investment funds, investment financial institutions that are looking to just buy up fucking land, right? So during war, prices drop. Okay, you swoop in, buy up all the assets. Also, there's an opportunity for investment. Like, what would be the biggest investments? Infrastructure. Okay, what's going on over there? Ask yourself what's going on over there. Bridges just got blown up. Roads got blown up. Walls got blown up. Okay, that means there's going to be companies like infrastructure companies, cement companies that are gonna get the contracts. Well, how is the government of the Ukraine, gonna pay for that? They're gonna have to borrow. Who's gonna supply that? Who's gonna supply that? World Bank and International Monetary Fund, or whoever else, maybe the European Central Bank, someone. Construction. Remember the footage of those huge apartment complexes and stuff that were shelled? I mean, why were they shelled? I mean, I don't know. I don't know about tactical. I mean, of course, they could have been housing large amounts of Ukrainian soldiers and material. I mean, but yeah, they were hit. So they're either going to be demolished and and whatever, but so they're gonna be suffering economically big time. Real estate. It's another thing that's going to be looking. I mean, as far as if people wanted to make money, how are they gonna off this, right? Economic recovery programs. Now, that's the same with the whole COVID thing, right? Ask yourself this, okay? COVID, as far as power grab, yeah, or it's just an asset grab. We had to borrow money, but what about every other country in the world? Well, every country in the world had to borrow money because of this pandemic or plandemic, right? But did you know that in the very poor countries, the interest rates are higher? We're lucky we can enjoy lower interest rates. So that's how they seize assets. Okay? That's how they take control of poorer countries. In a nutshell, and I'm going to close out this episode, um, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. If you'd indulge me, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to play this clip. Okay?
We economic hitmen really have been the ones responsible for.
There are two ways to conquer and enslave a nation. One is by sword, the other is by debt. John Adams, 1735 to 1826.
Hitmen really have been the ones responsible for creating this first truly global empire. And we work many different ways. But perhaps the most common is that we will identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. But the money never actually goes to the country. Instead, it goes to our big corporations to build infrastructure projects in that country, power plants, industrial parks, ports, things that benefit a few rich people in that country, in addition to our corporations, but really don't help the majority of the people at all. However, those people, the whole country is left holding a huge debt. It's such a big debt they can't repay it, and that's part of the plan, that they can't repay it. And so at some point, we economic hitmen go back to them and say, listen, you owe us a lot of money, can't pay your debt, so sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies. Allow us to build a military base in your country, or send troops in support of ours to someplace in the world like Iraq, or vote with us on the next UN vote to have their electric utility company privatized and their water and sewage system privatized and sold to U.S. corporations or other multinational corporations. So there's that whole mushrooming thing, and it's so typical of the way the IMF and the World Bank work. That you put a country in debt, it's such a big debt it can't pay it, and then you offer to refinance that debt and pay even more interest. And you demand this quid pro quo, which you call a conditionality or good governance, which means basically that they've got to sell off their resources, including many of their social services, their utility companies, their school systems sometimes, their penal systems, their insurance systems, to foreign corporations. So it's a double, triple, quadruple whammy. The precedent for economic hitmen really began back in the early 50s when democratically elected Mossadegh, who was elected in Iran. He was considered to be the hope for democracy in the Middle East and around the world. He was Time Magazine's Man of the Year. But one of the things that he'd run on and began to implement was the idea that foreign oil companies needed to pay the Iranian people a lot more for the oil that they were taking out of Iran. The Iranian people should benefit from their own oil. Strange policy. We didn't like that, of course. But we were afraid to do what we normally were doing, which was to send in the military. Instead, we sent in one CIA agent, Kermit Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt's relative. And Kermit went in with a few $1 million and was very, very effective and efficient. And in a short amount of time, he managed to get Mossadegh overthrown and brought in the Shah of Iran to replace him, who always was favorable to oil. And it was extremely effective.
Bombs overflow Tehran. Army officers shout that Mossadegh has surrendered and his regime as virtual dictator of Iran is ended. Pictures of the Shah paraded through the streets as sentiment reverses. The Shah is welcome home.
So back here in the United States, in Washington, people looked around and said, wow, that was easy and cheap. So this established a whole new way of manipulating countries, of creating empire. The only problem with Roosevelt was that he was a card-carrying CIA agent, and had he been caught, the ramifications could have been pretty serious. So very quickly at that point, the decision was made to use private consultants to channel the money through the World Bank or the IMF or one of the other such agencies, to bring in people like me who worked for...
Ask yourself this, y'all keep playing it. Who infiltrated the IMF and World Bank when they were created at the Bretton Woods Agreement? Who infiltrated the IMF and World Bank at the Bretton Woods Agreement when they were created. I didn't infiltrate them. No, I mean, do some research and tell me. That's your
So that
job.
if we got
That's your
caught,
task.
there would be no governmental
Come back with you.
ramifications. When Arbenz became president of Guatemala, the country was very much under the thumbs of the United Fruit Company, the big international corporations. And Arbenz ran on this ticket that said, we want to get the land back to the people. And once he took power, he was implementing policies that would do exactly that, give the land rights back to the people. The United Fruit didn't like that very much. And so they hired a public relations firm, launched a huge campaign in the United States to convince the United States people, the citizens of the United States, and the press of the United States, and the Congress of the United States, that Arbenz was a Soviet puppet, and that if we allowed him to stay in power, the Soviets would have a foothold in this hemisphere. And at that point in time was a huge fear on everybody's mind, the Red Terror, the Communist Terror. And so, to make a long story short, out of this public relations campaign came a commitment on the part of the CIA and the military to take this man out. And in fact, we did. We sent in planes, we sent in soldiers, we sent in Jackals, we sent in everything in to take him out, and it did take him out. And as soon as he was removed from office, the new guy that took over after him basically reinstated everything to the big international corporations, including United Fruit. Ecuador, for many, many years, had been ruled by pro-U.S. dictators, often relatively brutal. Then it was decided that we were going to have a truly democratic election. Jaime Roldos ran for office. And his main goal, he said, as president, would be to make sure that Ecuador's resources were used to help the people. And he won, overwhelmingly, by more votes than anybody had ever won anything in Ecuador. And he began to implement these policies to make sure that the profits from oil went to help the people. Well, we didn't like that in the United States. I was sent down as one of several economic hitmen to change Roldos, to corrupt him, to bring him around, to let him know, okay, you can get very rich, you and your family, if you play our game, but if you continue to try to keep these policies you promised, you're going to go. He wouldn't listen. He was assassinated. As soon as the plane crashed, the whole area was cordoned off. The only people allowed in the U.S. military from a nearby base and some of the Ecuadorian military. When an investigation was launched, two of the key witnesses died in car accidents before they had a chance to testify. A lot of very, very strange things that went on around the assassination of Jaime Roldos. I, like most people who really looked at this case, have absolutely no doubt that it was an assassination. And of course, in my position as an economic hitman, I was always expecting something to happen to Jaime, whether it be a coup or assassination, I wasn't sure, but that he would be taken down because he was not being corrupted. He would not allow himself to be corrupted the way we wanted to corrupt him. Omar Torrijos, president of Panama, was one of my favorite people. I really, really liked him. He was very charismatic. He was a guy who really wanted to help his country. And when I tried to bribe him or corrupt him, he said, look, John, he called me Juanito. He said, look, Juanito, I don't need the money. What I really need is for my country to be treated fairly. I need for the United States to repay the debts that you owe my people for all the destruction you've done here. I need to be in a position where I can help other Latin American countries win their independence and be free of this.
You see that? You see that? All those politicians, they didn't want the money. They just wanted to help out their country. None of them could be corrupted. And what happened? They were assassinated or they were couped.
This terrible presence from the north that you people are exploiting us so badly. I need to have the Panama Canal back in the hands of the Panamanian people. That's what I want. And so, leave me alone. Don't try to bribe me. It was 1981, and in May, Jaime Roldos was assassinated. And Omar was very aware of this. Torrijos got his family together and he said, I'm probably next. But it's okay, because I've done what I came here to do. I've renegotiated the canal. The canal will now be in our hands. He just finished negotiating the treaty with Jimmy Carter. In June of that same year, just a couple of months later, he also went down in an airplane crash, which there's no question was executed by CIA-sponsored Jackals. Tremendous amount of evidence that one of Torrijos.
And later, Reagan went in to Panama, if you remember that. Do you remember that?
The security guards handed him at the last moment as he was getting on the plane a tape recorder, a small tape recorder that contained a bomb. It is interesting to me how this system has continued pretty much the same way for years and years and years, except the economic hitmen have got better and better and better. Then we come up with, very recently, what happened in Venezuela in 1998, where Chavez gets elected president, following a long line of presidents who had been very corrupt and basically destroyed the economy of the country. And Chavez was elected amidst all that. Chavez stood up to the United States, and he's done it primarily demanding that Venezuelan oil be used to help the Venezuelan people. Well, we didn't like that in the United States. So in 2002, a coup was staged, which there's no question in my mind, and most other people's minds, that the CIA was behind that coup. The way that that coup was fomented was very reflective of what Kermit Roosevelt had done in Iran, of paying people to go out into the streets to riot, to protest, to say this Chavez is very unpopular. You know, if you can get a few thousand people to do that in television, can make it look like it's the whole country, and things start to mushroom. Except in the case of Chavez, he was smart enough, and the people were so strongly behind him that they overcame it, which was a phenomenal moment in the history of Latin America. Iraq actually is a perfect example of the way the whole system works. So we economic hitmen are the first line of defense. We go in, we try to...
Are you starting to see a pattern here? So you wonder why, when it comes to our shores here on American soil, that patriots or citizens or conspiracy theory enthusiasts, you know, would be a little concerned, because what does this have the earmarks of? I mean, you did witness things like Chuck Schumer saying, if you cross the intelligence agencies, they have 6 ways of Sunday to getting rid of you. Operation Hurricane, and just, you know, a general, like, trying to oust a duly elected sitting president, American sitting president, right? Then you had 2 impeachments of ridiculousness, an allegation of collusion that actually did have a legitimate chain of custody attached to it. And then an outright theft in the election using the guise of a pandemic. So you don't have to be a genius. You don't even need hard evidence. Just sit back 30,000 feet and look at the events transpire. And you start to kind of see a general culprit, right? So, you know, keep that in mind.
Corrupt governments and get them to accept these huge loans, which we then use as leverage to basically own them. If we fail, as I failed in Panama with Omar Torrijos and in Ecuador with Jaime Roldos, men who refuse to be corrupted, then the second line of defense is we send in the Jackals. And the Jackals either overthrow governments or they assassinate. And once that happens, when a new government comes in, boy, it's going to toe the line, because the new president knows what will happen if he doesn't. In the case of Iraq, both of those things failed. Economic hitmen were not able to get through to Saddam Hussein. We tried very hard. We tried to get him to accept a deal very similar to what the House of Saud had accepted in Saudi Arabia, but he wouldn't accept it. And so the Jackals went in to take him out. They couldn't do it. His security was very good. After all, he had one time worked for the CIA. He'd been hired to assassinate a former president of Iraq and failed, but he knew the system. So in '91, we send in the troops and we take out the Iraqi military. So we assume at that point that Saddam Hussein is going to come around. We could have taken him out, of course, at that time, but we didn't want him. He's the kind of strong man we like. He controls his people. We thought he could control the Kurds and keep the Iranians on their border and keep pumping oil for us. And then once we took out his military, now he's going to come around. So the economic hitmen go back in the 90s without success. If they had had success, he'd still be running the country. We'd be selling him all the fighter jets he wants and everything else he wants. But they couldn't. They didn't have success. The Jackals couldn't take him out again. So we sent the military in once again, and this time we did the complete job and took him out, and in the process created for ourselves some very, very lucrative construction deals. Had to reconstruct a country that we essentially destroyed, which is a pretty good deal if you own construction companies, big ones.
After the destruction of Iraq, who could move in? Infrastructure, real estate, construction, Halliburton. Who had invested interest in Halliburton? Dick Cheney.
So, Iraq shows the three stages. The economic hitmen failed there, the Jackals failed there, and as a final measure, the military goes in. And in that way, we've really created an empire, but we've done it very, very subtly. It's clandestine. All the empires of the past were built on the military, and everybody knew they were building them. So the British knew they were building them, the French, the Germans, the Romans, the Greeks, and they were proud of it. And they always had some excuse, like spreading civilization, spreading some religion, something like that. But they knew they were doing it. We don't. The majority of the people in the United States have no idea that we're living off the benefits of a clandestine empire, that today there's more slavery in the world than ever before. And then you have to ask yourself, well, if it's an empire, then who's the emperor? Obviously, our presidents of the United States are not emperors. An emperor is someone who's not elected, doesn't serve a limited term, and doesn't report to anyone, essentially. So you can't classify our presidents that way. But we do have what I consider to be the equivalent of the emperor, and it's what I call the corporatocracy. The corporatocracy is this group of individuals who run our biggest corporations, and they really act as the emperor of this empire. They control our media, either through direct ownership or advertising. They control most of our politicians because they finance their campaigns, either through their corporations or through personal contributions that come out of the corporations. They're not elected, they don't serve a limited term, they don't report to anybody. And at the very top of the corporatocracy, you really can't tell whether a person's working for a private corporation or the government because they're always moving back and forth. So, you've got a guy who one moment is the president of a big construction company like Halliburton, and the next moment he's vice president of the United States, or the president who is in the oil business. And this is true whether you've got Democrats or Republicans in the office. You have to moving back and forth through the revolving door. And in a way, our government is invisible a lot of the time, and its policies are carried out by our corporations on one level or another. And then again, the policies of the government are basically forged by the corporatocracy and then presented to the government. They become government policy. So it's an incredibly cozy relationship. This isn't a conspiracy theory type of thing. These people don't have to get together and plot to do things. They all basically work under one primary assumption, and that is that they must maximize profits regardless of the social and environmental costs.
This process of manipulation by the corporatocracy through the use of debt, bribery, and political overthrow is called globalization. Just as the Federal Reserve keeps the
globalists. sure.
American public in a position of indentured servitude through perpetual debt, inflation, and interest, the World Bank and IMF serve this role on a global scale. The basic scam is simple. Put a country in debt either by its own indiscretion or through corrupting the leader of that country, then impose conditionalities or structural adjustment policies, often consisting of the following.
When loans are made to like third world countries, say in Africa or whatever, right? Generally they're trying to get the resources, okay, but the people don't see any of the fruits of the loan. Generally, usually they say that we're building dams or we're building all this, but the only people who make the money are the businessmen at the top. But who gets saddled with the debt? The people. Did they vote to have this whatever loan? And how do you get a country in a position to where they're going to be needing loans? Well, one of the biggest is war.
Currency devaluation. When the value of a currency drops, so does
Currency devaluation.
everything valued in it. This makes indigenous resources available to predator countries at a fraction of their worth.
See that?
What?
Currency. Devaluate the currency, and it makes the natural resources cheap. Hold on, I'm writing that down. Devalue currency. Devaluation.
Large funding cuts for social programs. These usually include education and healthcare, compromising the well-being and integrity of the society, leaving the public vulnerable to exploitation. Privatization of state-owned enterprises. This
Privatization. See how that ties back into... Hold on. Private bank. Privatized. Who was moving in on it? Who was moving in on it? The West, right? This guy, right? That's how you control it. You privatize stuff that shouldn't be privatized.
means that socially important systems can be purchased and regulated by foreign corporations for profit. For example, in 1999, the World Bank insisted that the Bolivian government sell the public water system of its third largest city to a subsidy of the U.S. corporation Bechtel. As soon as this occurred, water bills for the already impoverished local residents skyrocketed. It wasn't until after a full-blown revolt by the people that the Bechtel contract was nullified. Then there is trade liberalization, or the opening up of the economy through removing any restrictions on foreign trade. This allows for a number of abusive economic manifestations.
No tariffs. What did Trump want to do? Tariffs.
Such as transnational corporations bringing in their own.
What did he cancel right away? TTP. Was it TPP? TPP trade agreement.
Mass-produced.
It didn't benefit America, but who did it benefit? Shareholders, corporations, corporatization, globalization, the globalists.
Products, undercutting the indigenous production and ruining local economies. An example is Jamaica, which, after accepting loans and conditionalities from the World Bank, lost its largest cash crop markets due to competition with Western imports. Today, countless farmers are out of work, for they are unable to compete with the large corporations. Another variation is the creation of numerous seemingly unnoticed, unregulated, inhumane sweatshop factories, which take advantage of the imposed economic hardship. Additionally, due to production deregulation, environmental destruction is perpetual, as a country's resources are often exploited by the indifferent corporations corporations while outputting large amounts of deliberate pollution.
The largest environmental lawsuit in the history of the world today is being brought on behalf of 30,000 Ecuadorian Amazonian people against Texaco, which is now owned by Chevron. So today it's against Chevron, but for activities conducted by Texaco. Estimated to be more than 18 times what the Exxon Valdez dumped into the coast of Alaska. In the case of Ecuador, it wasn't an accident. The oil companies did it intentionally. They knew they were doing it to save money out there rather than arranging for proper disposal.
Furthermore, a cursory glance at the performance record of the World Bank reveals that the institution, which publicly claims to help poor countries develop and alleviate poverty, has done nothing but increase poverty and the wealth gap, while corporate profits soar. In 1960, the income gap between the fifth of the world's people in the richest countries versus the fifth in the poorest countries was 30 to 1. By 1998, it was 74 to 1. While global GNP rose 40% between 1970 and 1985, those in poverty actually increased by 17%. While from 1985 to 2000, those living on less than $1 a day increased by 18%.
How do banks make money? Create a crisis. A war? Or a pandemic?
Even the Joint Economic Committee of the U.S. Congress admitted that there is a mere 40% success rate of all World Bank projects. In the late 1960s, the World Bank intervened in Ecuador with large loans. During the next 30 years, poverty grew from 50% to 70%. Under or unemployment grew from 15 to 70%. Public debt increased from 240 million to 16 billion, while the share of resources allocated to the poor went from 20% to 6%. In fact, by the year 2000, 50% of Ecuador's national budget had to be allocated for paying its debts. It is important to understand the World Bank is, in fact, a U.S. bank supporting U.S. interests. For the United States holds veto power over decisions, as it is the largest provider of capital. And where did it get this money? You guessed it. It made it out of thin air through the fractional reserve banking system. Of the world's top 100 economies, as based on annual GDP, 51 are corporations, and 47 of that 51 are U.S.-based. Walmart, General Motors, and Exxon are more economically powerful than Saudi Arabia, Poland, Norway, South Africa, Finland, Indonesia, and many others. And as protective trade barriers are broken down, currencies tossed together and manipulated in floating markets, and state economies overturned in favor of open competition and global capitalism,
Fiat's a
the
floating
empire
currency.
expands.
You get up on your little 21-inch screen and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today.
There is no Ukraine. There's just the corporations and banks and the financial investment interest in Ukraine. And who suffers? The Ukrainian citizen and the soldiers on both sides.
What do you think the Russians talk about in their councils of state? Karl Marx? They get out their linear programming charts, statistical decision theories, Minimax solutions, and compute the price-cost probabilities of their transactions and investments, just like we do. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale.